1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, foreshortening. 1, 2, 3, foreshortening. 1, 2, 3, foreshortening. 1, 2, 3, foreshortening. Yeah, let's all learn to draw foreshortening. If you've ever flipped through a comic book and been amazed by images of superheroes with their limbs like coming towards you, almost like they're kicking or punching through the picture plane towards you, well, that is foreshortening. Foreshortening is this phenomenon where an object that is tilted away from us at an angle appears shorter to us than we would normally experience it. And in drawing or painting a foreshortened object, it definitely is challenging, but you now have the skills through the sighting techniques, sighting for angles, alignments, and measurement, to be able to do effectively. It's almost impossible to accurately draw something foreshortened without applying some kind of sighting technique to the process. So what I've set up are 3 objects. 2 objects have circles that are foreshortened. So a foreshortened circle is also called an ellipse, as well as a spoon that is has a high degree of foreshortening. So I am going to attempt to accurately draw these objects. Now, I've already drawn my gesture drawing, and I definitely recommend starting with your gesture, just as I've done here, just so you have something on the page to then check when you start the sighting process. And I've lightly drawn the lines. You can see I've readjusted things. So sometimes when I'm figuring out, say, an ellipse, I'll go over and over until I start to feel like I've got a sense of that curve or that ellipse. And somewhere within this array of lines, hopefully, is the accurate line. But I drew it light enough that it's easy to erase and change. If I drew it too dark, then it would be difficult. So same with some of these other lines. So now I can start sighting and hopefully make it more accurate. So where do I start? Well, it doesn't really matter, but I think I might want to start just to check my angles. Remember, there's actual angles and implied angles, and there's angles of the objects. So I want to make sure that the angle of this cup is at a correct angle. So I'll draw a line through it, through the midpoint, make sure that's looking good. And I'll also do that with the spoon. Now the spoon is challenging because from my vantage point, it's almost a vertical, but it's not quite a vertical. It's just off the vertical. So I'm actually wanting to compare it to a vertical just to get a sense of the degree of that vertical. So I'll draw a vertical line there just so I can, and I'll use my sighting tool, and I'll actually see if I can see the degree of change in that angle. And I think it's something like this. So that's pretty much what I have. All right. So I feel pretty good with that. And I can, again, start to erase some lines if they get a little bit confusing. Okay, so I may still go back to checking angles, but I feel pretty good about some of these angles. So let's try measurements. And specifically, I'm going to just focus on one object at first. And let's say this tape. So I'm curious to see what is the overall height of either from the bottom of the tape to the back end compared to its width, or compare the inside or the top of this part of the ellipse and the back of that part of the ellipse compared to that. So the way I've drawn it, it's almost, let's see here. It'd be better if I had a, yeah, not quite half of that. So let me see, let me do some measuring. Okay, what I notice is that the width of the tape here is the same from the bottom of the tape to the top here is the same as from here to the back end of the tape. And so right now this is much bigger. This is too big. So what I need to do is shorten this or make this wider. So I think I'll do this because I'm liking where this is, and I'd have to change that. So it'll be much easier to change this down here. So I'm going to keep this part. Let me solidify that a little bit because I know that's where that's going to be. And if I'm going to keep this width, then I need to transfer this to here. So pretty much this is the bottom of the tape. Now I'm still not quite sure about the width of the tape here, so I'm just going to leave that blank, or not totally finished yet, because I feel good about these dimensions or proportions. All right. So that will change a little bit where this front edge of the box is. So what about the overall dimension this way horizontally versus vertically? So I'm wondering how this compares to this. So I'm going to do another measurement, and let's see here. So if I measure that front vertical axis to the horizontal, and what I see is that this length is roughly 2/3 of this one. So let's see what I have here. It'll be much easier for you when you're using the stick. Okay, it's not too bad. So I feel pretty good about that. Now I do want to, if this is the midpoint, I want to make sure that this is the same as that, because basically an ellipse is just a symmetrical form. And a lot of times when I'm drawing an ellipse is I want to go back a little bit to the continuous line process. So when I'm drawing a curve here, so I'm making sure that this curve and this curve kind of mirror each other, as well as this curve and this curve here, to keep it symmetrical. So the thing to avoid is ellipses that look like this, you know, where it looks like too pointy, or like you'd rarely see anything like this. Like even if it's a skinny ellipse, like you're looking at something from a very dramatic angle, there's probably going to be some amount of curve to that. So try not to flatten your edges there. And then of course asymmetrical form. So I'll kind of make it more dramatic here, you know, something like that. Like that's not symmetrical. So got to keep it symmetrical. And so I'm feeling pretty good with this. Now I've got the inside. So to continue the drawing, so lots of things I could do, but I could also take advantage of the fact that I feel pretty good about this object here. So I'm going to keep this where this is, and then I can look at the intersection points where this cup is, and it's, I think that the intersection points are here and here, and so I'm going to kind of re-gesture this cup opening, or the ellipse here, but still keep it light, and see if I can find any alignments this time. And I can also check for angles. This edge of the cup goes a little bit beyond the halfway point here, and then the height of that cup, let me measure it. So there is a lucky equivalent measurement. So when I checked the height from this point to the top of the cup here, was the same as this to this. So I'm going to make sure that is happening, and it looks pretty good. So the top of this circle is here. Now I'm wondering, how far out does this edge? Does it line up with this, or does it go beyond it, or is it before it? So let me check. So I see that it goes beyond it about this far. So even though there's not an alignment with this edge here, at least I can see the distance from this edge here, since I've already established that. So since I combine that knowledge with the intersection point that I noticed and the height, so now this ellipse is starting to take on the correct shape. So remember, it is a symmetrical form, so I want to make sure that it stays symmetrical. So I'll draw these axis lines here. So make sure that this is like that. So see, the illusion I'm trying to make is that even though if I was looking straight on, it would be a perfect circle. But since I'm looking at it at an angle, it's shorter this way now. Because in a perfect circle, this and this would be the same length. But since I'm looking at it at an angle going this way, this is now shorter than that. Okay, so double check my angles. Okay, so I feel good about these two ellipses here. Also, let me just add another observation. Check that angle. And that looks pretty good. So awesome. I think the back end, so I have the back end of this post right now gestured up here, but I think that's too much space from what I see. So this is actually more in the center point here. Okay, so that's definitely going to shorten the spoon even more. So often with foreshortening, your gesture may be wildly different than what you observe, just because it's counterintuitive, especially if we're drawing something that, like the spoon, which we know is much longer than it is wide. But then when we look at it at an angle, that changes. Check alignments. So I see an alignment between this intersection and the corner here. this edge I think is too far from that. I think this edge should be more like this. So this actually might come up. There we go. So in drawing, especially with foreshortened objects, I always like to have a level of healthy skepticism where it's like, I'm not quite sure if I have that right. Let me double check that. Now I'm checking the other side of the box just so that I can get the dimension of the box looking right. So there's multiple things I'm checking. Like this angle from here, this intersection point to the corner. So I'm not exactly drawing, like the drawing board that I'm using is tilted from my face too, so it's not ideal. I'm not in an ideal situation. Now in the classroom, drawing at an easel, that won't be the case. So it'll be much easier to make these observations without things warping. So in drawing this handle of this cup, I am certainly using sighting technique, but I'm also mostly just using continuous line. So going back to that can help draw some forms. So a lot of times in drawing, it's just going back and forth between continuous line, checking for intersection points, doing some sighting. Now this curve and this curve need to be somewhat even. So just like I did an ellipse here and an inside ellipse, even though you can't see that, I may do this too. And this will help me imagine where this ellipse is. I think the angle, I know that the bottom of the spoon is roughly about here to the tape. So the bottom of the spoon is about here. The inside of the spoon, the edge of the spoon is here. The front of the spoon is just below, it's sort of even with this part here. So here's where the inside of that spoon is. So again, I'm kind of relying a little bit on continuous line, and I'm just looking at this as a flat shape right now. This is that bottom part of the spoon here. And then I can, let me first of all double check the angle, get that midpoint. So now that I drew this shape, now I can determine its midpoint and extend that. So I need to check to see where the back end of the spoon is. So what I notice is that it is just above this back edge, like right about here. So this is what foreshortening will do, because like when you're drawing it, it's going to look weird because you're thinking, wait a minute, that's not what a spoon looks like, because we have knowledge in our mind of what a spoon should look like. And when we're drawing it on a flat surface, it seems that something must be wrong. But keep in mind that we're trying to translate from a 3D space to a 2D space. So this is that shape. Like when we start shading and doing things, I can make this look more three-dimensional. Like there's some little shadows and stuff. But as just a line drawing, it's going to look strange. And that's okay. So here's a cast shadow, just so you can start to see the form take shape. All right, and I also could have, I didn't do any measurement, I kind of relied on alignments, but I could have measured, say, here to here and compare that to, say, here to here. So on the drawing, let's see, I have that almost pretty much equivalent. So let's see if that's what's happening in reality, and it is awesome. So again, it's great when a couple things are agreeing. So the alignment is agreeing as well as the measurement observation. And so when that happens, then you're good to go. All right, so hopefully this will help you figure out how to draw foreshortened objects. We're going to be drawing some in class. So if you did the draw along with me, that's okay. May have been a little bit difficult because I did do a lot of changing and stuff. But if you want to, I would suggest setting up some objects similar to this and trying these techniques. So rely on sighting and intersection points. Definitely draw your gesture drawing first. And I'll see you in class.